Hi, I'm your host Peter Robbo, and welcome to the Downhill Slide. On this series, we're going to be meeting some of Australia's best skiers and snowboarders from times past, plus a few internationals too. So get comfy and buckle up for this podcast episode of the Downhill Slide.
I win, you lose. It's only for us two. I win, you lose.
On this edition of the Downhill Slide, we're going to meet an early cult figure of Australian snowboarding, complete with dreadlocks and a style to match. Once a skier, then a shredder, now a car racer. We're going to be getting up close and personal with Mr. Goodman.
Days when we were all alone. If you would ever leave me, I would call your phone. We would talk for days and never leave my home. I think about it. Always find a reason to be strung apart. Always wondered if and when you break my heart, you would try and argue with me from the start. I can live without it.
G'day Cal, and welcome to the Downhill Slide.
Yep, how's it going? Thanks for having us.
Oh, it's our pleasure. It's been a long time. We're looking forward to talk to you for a long time.
What do we got?
Well, I think we'll kick this off, sort of paint the picture for the people. Tell us a bit about yourself, Cal, where you grew up, school, sports you did when you were young.
Well, I grew up in Sydney and spent a lot of time in Thredbo. Family had a lodge in Thredbo back in the 80s and did a bit of ski racing at first, and then found snowboarding around 85, 86. And yeah, basically that changed my life as it did for many people. It was very different back then. And I was just a young kid, pretty much left school, dreamt about snowboarding every day, every night. And as you know, traveled all around Australia. And then basically we used to see what was going on overseas. And at that time we felt desperate to get there and be part of the whole scene. So we did whatever we could basically to get over there and travel and snowboard.
When was your first time in the snow and where did you go?
Snowboarding or just first time in snow?
Well, the first time in the snow, because I heard you say you started with skiing.
Yeah, so family had a history of being in the snow. I started skiing probably when I was about 4, mostly Thredbo. Family used to go to the snow every year, and then eventually the old man bought a lodge up at Thredbo, so spent a fair bit of time there from then on.
Nice. What was it that appealed to you about snowboarding in the early days? Because you were skiing and then all of a sudden snowboarding took over?
Yeah, there was something about it. When I was skiing, I didn't mind moguls. I love the freedom of it, but I just didn't feel right, in the regimented ski scene. I don't know if it was a turning point in my life, as a teenager. Basically, when I found snowboarding, you could wear what you want, you could do what you want, basically be who you wanted. And, we skated, we surfed at the same time. It was me to snowboard.
So who were the mates you met riding in those early years? Tell us about them.
So started early with my brother. We borrowed an old Burton Elite, the old 3-fin things. That was one of the first boards we rode. The first thing we did was took the fins off because they sucked with the fins on. And but I remember, at Thredbo, you'd go into the bistro to get some food at lunchtime, and I'd look over into the corner and there's this other dude I'd been seeing on the hill for a bit, and that was Tim Volandis. He's there starting off around the same time. There was a few other guys that aren't really around now, but early on crew, and you just see him over, and eventually got to know him, and we hung out, and it became family ever since.
I imagine Tim was pretty much the same as he's always been, even back then.
Yeah, Timmy's a legend, mate. He's been there right from the start, and yeah, he probably rides as good or better now than he did back then too.
So when did you meet up with guys like Dave? Because I know you're pretty friendly with Dave Kelly.
Yeah, so around 80s, well, I can't remember the date, 86, 87, 88, something like that. I was down sitting on DY Beach. All we did was surf every day, dreaming on how do we get to the US. And basically, it's a long story, but we managed to get a plane ticket. I flew to the US. I had nothing. I had $200 in my pocket. Went over with another mate of mine, and we went over and did the Pepsi Pro-Am series through Colorado. So that was pretty cool. And then, so we did that for probably 1 or 2 years. And then coming back here, that's when I met Dave. So he was over there training as well. And but I met Dave, I think, back in Australia for the first time. And we competed head to head. We were juniors at the time, and we were main rivals in many, many events. And we became great friends and became basically family. I lived with Dave for many, many years. I lived at his house. His parents looked after us, and that was good times.
So whereabouts in Colorado did you go to on that first trip when you were on that series?
So the very first place we went to was Durango, Colorado, and we rode Purgatory, Wolf Creek, Telluride, up around Steamboat, Vail, but I was based mostly in Durango. So, yeah, that first year, I remember we rocked up at the airport. We knew virtually nothing. We rocked up in board shorts, plane landed at about 11:30 at night. And it's minus 15 degrees, We had nowhere to stay. We knew nobody there. We hadn't booked anything. So that first night we slept in the deli section in the 24-hour supermarket. So,
nice
just trying to get
there.
Yep.
Now tell me about, because when I first met you, you were with Dean Adjic from Clearwater was around, and then there were all the guys like Sean and Jason and Willie and Tim, Dave, yourself, Aaron. Was Dean the central point for that group to get together?
Yeah, he probably was for a bit of that crew. He had the snowboard shop. A lot of us were from the Northern Beaches, so we'd hang there. He'd have boards. He'd have clothing. It was just a great spot, I guess, for everyone to hang out. But about that time as well, I was in Victoria a fair bit. So, we'd live with Frank Penzis down there. He'd look after us, he'd feed us and look after us with boards and stuff too. So, but Adjic was definitely, it was a pretty wild place to be.
I've got fond memories of Dean in that era of that time, because I think, as I said, it was around that 89 period where you guys all showed up at Buller that I sort of met most of you. I'd known Dean for a couple of years prior. I think I met him up at the Oz Classic at Guffiger there. That was pretty much when I first ran into everybody again. And Dean is in a way sort of a bit of a Tim character. He was definitely different, and he was keen to push this thing along. And we got on famously. I thought he was a great inspiration behind the early days of snowboarding, with his colour and his flair and his style, and the guys he brought with him, which was all you guys. I thought that was almost a masterstroke, because it was what the sport needed back then.
I remember that year as well. I think we had a big gathering at one of the comps at Falls Creek that same year. I remember we convoyed down. There was me, Dave Valandis, Sean Gall, Jason Bull, Adjic, I think. The whole crew was there. And I remember, Aaron Latinovic. It was a hectic drive down. And I remember on the way back, we strapped Tim Valandis to the roof racks. And if you've come back up the Alpine way to Thredbo, it's a 200-foot drop off the edge, and he's up there strapped into the snowboard on the roof. Well, we're just hooking through the corners, and it was a great time.
Knowing Timmy wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly.
So who were the early sponsors that took interest in you when you were young and sort of motivated you to take it further?
So I had quite a few different sponsors. Rode for Wave Rave, Frank Penzis with Barfoot Snowboards, Oakley. That changed a little bit throughout. Then I ended up, when Rip Curl came onto the scene, they wanted to get into snowboarding and release all this new mountain wear. So I ended up on board with Rip Curl right at the beginning there and helped them develop all the mountain wear. Then after that, Ocean and Earth came onto the scene. We did a fair bit of development with them as well. So yeah, had a whole good crew behind us, supporting us.
Because I think when I first met you, you were riding Kemper.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
So you got involved with Ned Wallace at some stage.
Yeah. So prior to that, so I'd come back from the US on this plywood Sims, and there's a whole story behind that board. Anyway, so Frank Penzis picked us up on Barfoot, and I remember one of the Australian Championship series, I needed to run this board because it's a 2 metre in the slalom, Australian Championships, but with our Barfoot commitments, I had to race on my 151 freestyle board. So I'm racing Dave Kelly in the Australian Championships in the junior series, and I'm on the little freestyle board, So I think he ended up winning that one. I got second, and but that was great. And then as boards progressed, we ended up on Kemper. So that went away from the plywood boards more into a proper built board with sidewalls and everything.
So tell us about this red Sims you've got behind you. What's the story with her?
So that board, it was made behind the scenes at Sims. I found the guy who built it, who worked for Tom Sims. I had a good chat to Tom Sims about it, and Tom said, no, that board should never have actually been out and about. They made 1 or 2 different variations for Sean Palmer and a couple of the other pro riders. But this one, I think, was made at like 2 a.m. on a Saturday night with some of the crew working at Sims. And I managed to get that from Tim Windell's shop. We had 2 of them. We had this board and we had a 210 metre with a speed hole cut out in the nose that was Sean Palmer's old board. And that's what we rode. And we just caused havoc all over the hill. And, ollying fences and riding a million miles an hour. It was great.
So you're ollying fences on this beast behind you?
Yeah, so at Purgatory, they got flat sections which drop off into really steep sections. And we would just hook it down. They'd have ski patrol signs or safety fences. And we just ollie these fences. And, yeah, they hated it, but it was good fun.
Respect was always there, huh?
Yeah.
So tell us about some of those early contests you did, Cal, because I figured you were around when they really kicked off. I was guessing somewhere around 86, 87 sometime, which is when I came back into the sport via Frank Penzis, when I met he and Jeff Purcell down in Melbourne, and they were surprised to see that there was some older boy that had actually been fiddling with this thing prior, and so I hooked up with them, and they're the ones that took me up to the Oz Classic at Guthiget, I think, that Kerry Pogson sponsored with Omni.
Yep. Yeah.
So you did all those races, and did any sort of results to mention? Obviously, you had Dave and Tim in your hair, which didn't help.
We started off, racing in Australia, that Guthiget series. Did really well, got plenty of trophies, first, seconds or thirds. At that time I was a junior, and then eventually went overseas to do that Pepsi Pro-Am series, which I managed to get top 10 results in all the events. And and then came back, and the series just got bigger and bigger here. So we had, the hand dug half pipes in Thredbo, Bulla, Hotham, and just did all the Australian comps that we could.
Yeah, I've got some fond memories of that first event that we did at Bulla in '89. Because funnily enough, Brian Singer was on the ski patrol at Mount Bulla the day I did my first unsuccessful snowboard demo back in 1982, trying to ride effectively what's a water ski down a ski run, because they were laminated wooden boards with basically water ski straps on them. And he said to me, "I can't even believe you're thinking of trying to do this." And I said, "Well, I think there's something to this, we might be not right there at the moment, but there's something to it." And him being a surfer, he was curious, but him also being boss of the ski patrol, he couldn't swing open the door for the general public. But back in those days, I wasn't even thinking about the general public. We just wanted a couple of runs that we could use the lift so that we didn't have to walk up the hill all the time. And
absolutely,
we got snubbed on that one too, so we had to become outlaws and sneak up early. We used to go up, get up early and get up there about 7:30, 8 in the morning before they'd opened anything, because all the snowcats had groomed everything so it was perfect. So we'd fly a few runs down, and then we'd have to beat it because they'd see all the tracks everywhere, and they were sort of starting to mount a bit of a search as to who was doing this out before the resort was meant to be open of a morning. So but nice. No, it was a funny little crew, because back in those days there really wasn't many people. There was me and the occasional client that I'd sold an early Burton backhill to, and we'd get up and we'd go out there. I think Ali Lentini was one of the first guys I ran into, and strangely enough, Richard Palmer with Winterstick said that Ali was his first customer 2 years before. So if I have to look for a first snowboarder, I guess I'd be looking at guys like Richard Palmer and Ali Lentini, and no doubt there was a couple of other guys too. So so it's a funny connection with all these people. I ran into Thor Prohaska. He came over to a freestyle skiing event, because that was my gig back in the early days. And but I always took the Burton backhill in the bag with me, because you never knew the conditions, and if the snow wasn't great, we'd get the board out, or if the weather closed in, we just get the board out and just go powering through the deep stuff, because even on the old water ski, it didn't matter. As long as it was deep, it handled okay. So it just got tricky when we wanted to get on the resorts, and all of a sudden we were dealing with very different conditions, and the original boards were never designed for any of that. Of course, they were only designed to be ridden in the deep. And then the resorts insisted on safety things, and design had to change if this sport was going to actually become bigger. And then, as you said before, sidewalls and edges and ski construction for the materials inside of the board, everything changed big time. And so for me, it was like two sports. There was a sport before the resorts, and there was a sport after it, because before it was just trekking up on those deep, soft, hopefully powder snow days. There's not too many of those in Australia, but we'll take the deep stuff. And then all that push really changed the shape of the boards, the design, everything. And then it just became a new sport again, I think, somewhere around the mid 80s, when all that design change occurred. Yeah. So what trips did you do overseas with the guys, and who did you go with?
We did the US pretty full on for racing about 11 years in a row. First year I did with Tim Butterworth. I think second or third year we took Tim Volandis. Went over a year with my nephew Shane. At that time, I mean, there's races sort of going on all around the world, but we were based basically in southern Colorado. That was our main thing. We were there for the deep snow, and early on we were there for the comps. But I ended up meeting a great crew over there, pretty hardcore, like early on snowboarders. One of the guys, Randy Rod, he was sponsored by Gresham Snowboards. He was from Cortez, Colorado. And they were like all the early badass guys of the short boards, back pants. We just rode hardcore terrain. I remember being there one year with my nephew Shane. I was on the 173 Joyride flower pot, I think it was, and he's on a 186 Nitro Diablo freestyle board, and that's a big board, but the snow was deep, and we just ran amok for months on end.
Yeah, it's incredible how big the boards were in those early days. I don't think there was much under about a 160 when I sort of appeared back on the scene around 87 sometime there. Because the original back hills were very short; they're only 125. So obviously, once you got a bit of speed up on these things, that was not the place to be at all. So, no, I was always impressed watching the size of some of these boards. I mean, the asymmetrical boards came in, and I remember you were an intriguing one because you rode very well in the gates, but you're also very, very good in freestyle. So. I always thought that was pretty good because they're two completely different approaches, aren't they?
Yeah, back in the day, I mean, we had to do everything: moguls and half pipe, and whatever freestyle was at the time, and you had to run gates as well. And but that's where Dave Kelly, he was very strong too, because he came from a pretty technical ski background and knew how to cut a turn on snow. So. Yeah, not only good in the pipe, but very strong riding on the hill too.
Yeah, because I imagine that Dave would have come from a ski background because his family was up there. He's had a lodge at Thredbo or near Thredbo, didn't they? So
yeah, yep. And then
I remember,
if you remember, we had some of the Americans come out. I can't remember the year. Late 80s, round about 90s, when Tim Wendell came out, Craig Kelly came out. That was a great time. So where we spent time in Colorado, that's where Tim Wendell was. So we used to buy our boards off Tim there. And they had there was a whole hardcore Sims crew there as well that was just coming up on the scene. And they used to call themselves the Swiss team, which was Sims upside down. So that's where it all sort of started. And I remember when Craig and Tim came out to Australia, they stayed at our place up on the hill. And that was right at the turn when Craig was going from Sims to Burton. And so I guess big time change for his sponsorship there. And that was huge for Australia, having those guys out here and seeing them rip.
Yeah, I remember that event. I think it was 89. I think it was the second leg of that Australian Championship, wasn't it, in 89 where they appeared? And I ended up doing an interview with Craig for the old Snowboarders Edge magazine back then. And no, it was impressive. I went for a couple of runs with him, and I'm just carving down the run, and he's hitting everything possible, going off knolls, bumps, little trees. Going backwards, hitting the air landing fakie, raping off, kicking back round, he'd go up off something. I just thought, wow, how's this? He just used every single facet of the mountain. He was he was an artist with a canvas almost, wasn't he?
Yeah, he rode lines that we'd never even seen, the same run that we'd done 100 times, and he was finding lines on it that were pretty impressive. So, yeah, pretty awesome.
And before his time, you probably remember also, I think, Dean and Trish from Clearwater. They brought Damien Sanders and Dana Nicholson out for
that's right.
For a trip. Were you around at that time? Can you tell us a bit about what it was like when they showed up?
Yeah, I wasn't doing much with those guys then. They had a bit of an avalanche crew on the avalanche boards. I think I rode. Agic put us on an avalanche once, and the front binding snapped off as I was going to the race course. So we handed that back. But we didn't have much to do with the avalanche crew because we were on Barfoot, hanging out, or Sims, or whatever we were on at the time. So.
And so Frank was handling Barfoot back in those early days, was he?
Yeah. Yep.
Because I remember Danny Monaghan was riding a Barfoot, and I think Frank was on a board much similar to what you've got behind you, but it wasn't the big one. I think it was the 1710 blade, but basically the same construction, which was laminated ply and things. So, so all these boards. Yeah. What are the boards that you've preferred in your time? What's the board that You felt the most. This is Cal Goodman. This is Cal Goodman all over this board.
One of the best boards early on. So this Sims 2000 was me for sure. Barfoot, I had a plywood red top. It was like a clear red top. But plywood, so it had no sidewalls. That board was phenomenal. So back then, tip rolls were a big trick, going backwards. That thing tip rolled so well. But then after that, Barfoot went to more like a fluoro green top and had sidewalls. Still a great board, but I preferred the red one. And then when we got onto Kemper, they were great boards, no doubt, but it wasn't really my board. Never really felt like it was me on Kemper. And I've actually got an old Santa Cruz as well, a Chris Roach Santa Cruz board. And that was one of the best boards that I felt for me that I ever had as well. Probably on the 173 Joyride. So, yeah, pretty sick. But hard to come by now. You can't find a 173 Joyride.
I don't think they make anything over 160 these days, do they?
Yeah. But in saying that, now the boards now, I've got a handful of boards now, and mate, they're unreal. So
you were mentioning the old Sims team. They call themselves the Swiss. Who was on that crew back in those early days with Sims?
So there was Tim Windell. It was all the southern Colorado crew, I think. Probably Palmer was on it. I can't remember half the guys because they weren't really anybody at the time. It was all just starting, and we would hang out with them at parties doing things that we probably shouldn't have been doing, and that was the Swiss team. So, yeah. Yeah,
no, it's true. It's true because in all those early days, everyone was just basically nobody other than a couple of the big stars, of course. But guys that went on to become very influential, you think, I actually shared some time with him or her, and they're good. They're good memories. Those. If you had to consider Dave and Tim and Sean and all these guys, I'm presuming there was like a really healthy push from this group to develop and go one bit better, one bit harder, one bit higher than each other, and that must have fueled the development between you guys a lot, I imagine.
Sure. Yep. And the other thing was early on, the tricks weren't here. So to do a 360 or a 540 or anything after that, one of us had to start it and get it happening. Literally, because we started basically right from the beginning, nobody was doing that stuff in Australia at the time. And, Gawley and all those guys, they brought in super cool skate tricks, and they didn't care, mate. If it's a tree, you ride the tree. If it's a rail, you ride the rail. It was cool as hell, Cut your boots down so you got sneakers and riding your sneakers with no high backs.
And I think that was a very, very rich period, all of that. And I was quite taken with that group when I met them, because for me it was kind of strange when I went back, because I'd been away from Mount Buller for a little while, and the last time I'd seen them, they were pretty anti-snowboarding, and then I got a phone call from them, and then I think it was Long John from Rip Curl came up, and he came to the shop I was working in, which was Snow Zone in Melbourne, and they knew I was into snowboarding, and I was a bit friends with the K2 distributor, Mike Balfe, and they said, look, would you like to get into this properly? Because I guess at the time they didn't really know much of anybody else that had been there long enough to sort of see what this sport was doing. And admittedly, I'd had a bit of an absence, but when we came back into it around 87, 88, it came back strong, because all of a sudden we had these boards that it really didn't matter what the conditions were like when you went out, because you could ride, you could handle anything. And those boards rode equally well in powder as the old boards, if not better again. So, so no, it was quite an interesting homecoming for all that. And I still remember rolling up that afternoon, because I'd come up a couple of days before the event, and I think Shane Young, he was a Canadian guy that came over and stayed with Team Buller for that season. You'd probably remember Shane. He was quite a good rider in the pipe and also quite a good rider in the gates. He had no fear. He'd launch and go off everything, and he was riding an old Storm board, I think it was.
Oh yeah.
And I get up there, and the mountain manager said, "You're going to be really happy. We've prepared everything." And I went up the hill with them on the skidoo and looked and went, "Oh, that's not going to work." And they said, "What do you mean that's not going to work?" And I said, "Well, it's nice what you've done. They built an in ramp into like just a one-hit quarter pipe wall." And I said,
Yeah.
"No, that's not going to cut it." And they said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, because we've promoted this thing for nearly 2 weeks, and we've got Channel 9's Wide World of Sports arriving up here tomorrow, and
Oh yeah.
Triple M's been raving on about it left, right, and centre." And I said, it's not going to be enough as a spectator event, just a one-hit wall. So I said, we're going to have to do something different. So I was going nowhere fast, and the cat driver came over to me and just said, "Listen, mate, what would you like me to do?" And I said, "Look, what I'd really love you to do would be to drag all that snow from the base of that slope there and just start pushing up two parallel walls for us about, 15, 20 metres apart." So he just chipped straight in, ploughed them up, and then I think all you guys showed up, and we were starting the event the next day, and I thought, well, we've got the walls, but they don't look like much. So, okay,
Yeah.
boys, if we're going to have an event, we're going to have to get digging. So out came the shovels, the skis, the boards, dinner trays, anything that would help shape and shift. And then I said to everyone, "Look, we're going to turn on happy hour for everyone down at the Alpine Retreat afterwards." And I put that straight on Rip Curl's bill. So they weren't too happy about that when they got up, because the boys had gone for, we'd had cocktails and all sorts of things. But fair enough, they wanted an event. We gave them an event. So in my school, you do what it takes to get it to happen.
I actually remember those days pretty well, and those nights. Yeah, they were pretty wild. Yeah, I think that was the year we all stayed in the attic in one of the hotels there.
Yeah, that was right. That was up in the roof at the Alpine Retreat. That was like a great dormitory up there with all the boys in it. And it was the place to be at the time, I remember.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember Tim, Dave and I were a pretty tight pack down there those few nights. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I heard some funny stories emerge from them, which I actually didn't know at the time. So I don't know if this is the place to discuss those, but
Yeah,
no, it sounded like you guys had some fun, and I had them knocking on my door inquiring as to what's going on. And I said, "Well, look, this is part of it. This is all part of the new wave that's coming. And my advice is just to brace yourselves and get ready for it,
Yeah. And that was pretty standard worldwide. It was hectic. It was a lot of ruckus, and I've got a family now, so I probably won't say too much, but yeah, it was good times for sure.
No, but I think it was interesting because the alpine world of resorts and skiing was really plateauing off at that time. I remember, it had just hit a real flat spot, and I think snowboarding was the perfect medicine for all of that. It just came along with this fresh approach, this fresh attitude, this fresh crew that weren't necessarily mountain people. You and Dave had time up there with Tim a bit, but a lot of the guys, this was all brand new to them coming up into the snow, so they just brought their beach or their skate routines with them, and I thought that was so refreshing. And I think that's what the media seized on, that there was a new kid on the block, and it was colourful and it was fun. And I remember, for me, when those very first American freestyle skiers showed up in Australia around the end of the 70s, early 80s, I just thought they were the coolest people I'd met. They show up in long hair and they're smoking joints and crazy clothes and talk, and music's going at the events and everyone's hanging out and they're pumping everyone up. And we just thought they were just the new gods of the snow at the time. And I think in a way they sort of helped pave the way for snowboarding to make some sort of route around the mid 80s, because in the early days of freestyle, the resorts weren't that keen either, because they were a pretty rowdy bunch too, and they liked to party hard as well, and didn't take kindly to authority. We wanted to go wherever we wanted to go, jump off anything that was in our way, all those sort of things. So it naturally rubbed shoulders with the traditional alpine world. And I remember the guys at the ski school coming up to me one afternoon there when I was organising that first event and said, "Look, I can't believe you're doing all this. And I said, oh, what's the thing? I said, yeah, this is not serious. This is just one of those fad things that's going to go away.
Yeah,
As I said, maybe a bit like the old hula hoop or the yo-yo and things. But no, I said, no, look, come on. I said, well, we're disappointed in you because you used to be an instructor with us and you used to all these things I used to be. And I said, well, this is where it's at. I said, this is just so much fun. I said, I'd love to get you guys on a board and I tried to convince about 2 or 3 of the instructors to come out and have a ride with me. And I struggled. And then I eventually found an alpine board that they could click their boots into. So I took a couple of them over to the side and went down Shaky Knees or somewhere like that with them. And, the first few runs on a snowboard, it's not the funniest experience you have. You usually spend most of the time smacking your coccyx bone or flipping over and whacking your face into the snow. But yeah, they started to get the hang of it, and then they could sort of see where it was coming from. So I think it helped because it's like anything new; it's scary for most people, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We were lucky at Thredbo that we had a few of the old freestyle ski guys too, because we copped a lot of hate for many years. But the freestyle ski guys were the cool guys. They were older and they were happy for us to be there. Where a lot of people weren't.
I'm sure because they understood it. They got it. Admittedly, yes, it was still skiing, but it was taking skiing into places it had never been before. Gates and poles and flags didn't matter. Everything that mattered was moguls and airs and jumps and getting
whatever
crazy
you could
out
think
there.
of. Yeah.
Who were some of those guys from Thredbo that sided up with you and thought you were pretty good at the time?
Mainly Randy Wyman.
Oh, yeah.
So he owned Hot Shots. He was one of the main guys that pushed freestyle skiing in Thredbo. I was always a kid. He was a bit older, but he was always nice and kind to us and probably helped us out, where a lot of the Thredbo management and there was a lot of people that didn't like us at the time.
Yeah, Randy Weeman was a good boy. He was the real instigation behind the whole freestyle series with the Peter Stuyvesant tour, and then he organised the Range Rover series for Australians only. And no, I think he was a good force, and he was a man for the moment. He was also a hell of a skier, and I think the original freestyle champion. But back in those days, like with snowboarding, there probably wasn't that many guys going around. But no, he was definitely a good force, I thought. And I had
he's
a funny
got a lot
story.
of history now.
Yeah, I had a funny story with him. He showed up at one of the Range Rover series events with Nat Young, and Nat was riding his mono board in those days, and this must have been around 1982, I think. And I'd taken the back hill up with me like I always did to those mogul events because here and there was good stashes, and we were just about set to start, and a mist blew in at Guthigan, and all of a sudden you couldn't see the bumps very well, which is skiing moguls in the mist that's just got trouble written all over it. So they postponed it for a little while just to let the weather clear. So I thought, oh well, this is the time. So I got out of my boots and I pulled on I think I had just like a pair of old mountain hiking boots that I used to ride this back hill with, and I put them on and I started blasting off down this gully right next to where the bump run was. And I was walking up and down, and the boys were all standing up there laughing and whistling and making comments and things, And because I think for a lot of them, it's the first time they'd ever seen snowboarding. Even a lot of the American guys that were visiting and things, they hadn't been exposed to it that much, even back home in the US. So, and then Nat was giving me a hard time. I think it was all this sort of thing. And I just looked at his mono ski and I said, well, if you reckon that's the future, you're wrong. I said, this is the future. Because I think he got heavily involved with winter stick there for a while. But as you know, I mean, all those boards were from one generation, and then what you really started to ride and get good on was just another thought process again.
Mm.
So how long did you stay active as one of Australia's early pros, Cal, before things like family and all that came along?
I rode, say, mid-80s to roughly mid-90s, trying to push still with, photo shoots, competitions, whatever it was that we're trying to do. But then around probably mid-90s, I started to feel the urge that I needed to do something, business-wise. So we started to import snowboards into Australia. We imported aggression snowboards, Tech 9 bindings, special blend clothing, and a few other different things. And at that time, it was quite difficult because the boards, we set up in Australia, we did all the promotion for it, and then the companies either went broke or struggled in America, so we couldn't get supply of the stock. So we did that for a few years. And then after that, I got a little bit burnt out just in the whole snow scene. There's a lot of new people coming in, heaps of cool people, but the scene was changing as well. And it wasn't grassroots anymore, and it wasn't as kind of hardcore as it used to be. And so, I felt I got burnt out. I didn't want to go up the hill. I didn't really want to see anyone apart from my close mates that I rode with. And so basically I went and got a job, went and tried to fit into society, I guess. And the trouble was, every time it snowed, if I was at uni doing a course or whatever I was trying to do, as soon as June came along and you get the first word of a dump, that's it, I was out of there, back down. But that actually did me some good. So I probably stepped away from it for 5, 8, 10 years, got the rest of my life underway and sorted. And then I came back into snowboarding, like not in a business sense, but like I love snowboarding now as much as I ever have. And it's me, it's ingrained into my body. If my back hurts from getting out of bed or whatever it is, I can go snowboard all day. It doesn't matter, like that's what my body is. That's what I'm built for. So yeah, after that break, now I love it. I'm back in. I love it. Got a great quiver of boards. The gear's fantastic. The whole crew that's in it, all these new people, like the whole scene it's cool as hell again,
Yeah. So what are you riding these days?
I've got a few boards. Mostly this year are all hand-me-downs from my son. So, because he races bordercross and a fair bit of other stuff. So usually I look after him with whatever he needs. And if he doesn't like a board, then he palms it down to me.
That's good to see the Goodman tradition continuing with your son. What's his name?
Noah Goodman, and my daughter Tanika, she raced as well, and she rips on a board too. So yeah, we got a good crew.
How old are they now?
Tanika's 21 this year, and my son's 16. So yeah, pretty much he's where I was. What we're talking about in this interview, So
it changes quick when family comes on, doesn't it?
Yeah, so I look at him now, and I left school when I was in year 9. I only went to year 10 for about a month, and then they told me to go to leave, basically. And so that's when I found snowboarding. And at his age, I'd already done a year or so overseas, and so it's cool to be able to help them and teach them how to ride.
So snowboarding saved your life in the end?
Yeah, probably, pretty much. Yeah, that's how I met my wife, working in Bart's snowboard shop. She came in to buy boots, and that was it. She was stuck forever.
I love those sort of hookups. I think that's fantastic. So
yeah.
Bart Joseph, he's incriminated in all of this too, huh?
Yeah, so for me, Bart was always there right at the early Guthica days. But for me, once I got out of that and then started to get a life, I guess, out of snowboarding, making some money and doing other things, Bart's always been there. He's helped all of us out. He's been a great mentor. He's helped us with everything, mentally, financially, and yeah.
I think he's a brilliant man. Strange enough, he's one of the first guys I met when we went up to Guthica for that 87 event. And I think he was my first photo. I thought, well, I'm going to get some good shots. So I snapped a shot of him from behind as he's just about to launch out of the gates and go down the race course that day in the mist. And No, I've got a lot of respect for people like Carey and Bart and all that were around in those days, and
Yeah,
um, because as we all know, there's never been much snowboarding money attached to the sport. So if you didn't do
in
it for the
Australia.
love,
Yeah,
then
that's right.
yeah, if you didn't do it for the love, you just didn't really do it. So
Yep. Well, we never made any money. Um, yeah, I never made any money. I mean, we're always, you go into Rip Curl or Ocean and Earth or whatever, you get the biggest bag and you'd walk down the aisles and you fill the bag full of as much gear as you could, and then you'd sell it on the side or whatever to make a bit of money. But there was never really any money here at our time,
I suppose it would have made you a bit envious when you saw how it was going overseas and some of the good deals that the better riders started to get on. I mean, there was Craig, of course, but there was many other riders too, like Steve Graham and Chris Roach and Noah Sellersneck and all sorts of guys starting to emerge and pop up. And there's the famous ones like Kidwell and Palmer and things. But I think it was really that next crew that appeared roughly at the same time that you guys appeared that really benefited. There was the early crew, and then there was the guys that took that next baton, and they were the ones that really started to fundamentally really create the sport, I thought, with attitude and colour and style and character, and really set it apart. Because for me, what I loved about snowboarding is it wasn't really trying to be anything else. It came from surfing originally, then it took a very heavy influence from skateboarding, and in the end it just settled down and just became itself.
And look, for us, when we were young and seeing what the Americans were doing, I don't think, for me personally, I don't think I saw the money, but I just saw what they were doing, and we wanted to be at those comps. We wanted to maybe get the trophies and be around everything that was going on. But I don't think I ever really saw that kind of money then either. So we were just there for the whole scene.
Oh, and the inspiration of riding with those guys, I'm sure you learned a lot by being around them, because you were mixing in a very different level of rider skill and tricks all of a sudden, and an attitude that was pushing all these boundaries way further than you guys were even thinking too, I'd imagine.
Yep. And there was other guys, Jose Fernandez, he was incredible. That guy could ride a board and rip a turn better than anybody back then, Nick Parada, he was a wild man as well. There was a lot of good guys basically cutting their own way or paving the way,
Yeah, I remember Jose. He was, I don't know, I don't remember how I got in touch with him. I got in touch with him. I came across a European photographer called Stefan Fiedler, who was very active at the time, and he suggested I get in touch with Jose, who I'd actually not heard of before at that stage. And I contacted him around the mid late 80s there, when Frank decided to get the magazine off the ground and wanted myself and Ali and Trent to be involved in this thing. And he was a good boy. He wrote back to me. He was actually on the letter got redirected to him, and he said, well, I'm actually on the World Cup tour at the moment. And I thought, oh, that's great. So he just fed us info and news, and Stefan would shoot us shots, which back in those days was enormous for us, because there was no raw material in Australia, because it was a couple of local photographers who we've just mentioned, riders and things, but we didn't really have a lot of exposure to what was happening in that big overseas scene. So I've got a lot of fond memories of Jose, and it'd be good to catch up with him again one day soon too. I'm hoping on doing that at some point.
Yeah, for sure. And early on, in Australia, you were saying with hard to get content, and with Ali and Trent and Scott and all the guys that were taking shots, I spent a lot of time with Ali and Trent and Needham and Harrow. With what those guys were doing, that really helped pave the way for all of us, because we wouldn't have had any of what we got now without those guys,
Yes, and that's true. And I always respect these guys, because the photographer's got to get into a pretty precarious position sometimes to get great shots, and
yeah, absolutely.
It's not an often very commended or rewarded position, but in the same for America and Europe, all those photographers have really what have driven the sport, because for the first time you had those images. I remember those early snowboard magazines. It was a real scramble to get one in the old days. Absolutely Radical or International Snowboard Magazine or one of those sort of things, and you would sort of, I've got one. So all the boys would fly around to your house or go someone else's house to sit down and have a look at it and see who was in it and what it was all about. And
Yeah.
so when Frank said, "Look, what about we do something here?" I thought it was good. I knew it'd be pretty brute. It would be pretty raw because the sport was exactly that at the time. It wasn't a polished diamond by any stretch, but I thought, well, look, we just let it run. Frank was the editor, but he listened to us a lot because we'd had a lot of experience with ski magazines and surf magazines, and the job I was doing at the time, working in tourism marketing and things. So he was very keen to hear our perspectives and what would make an impact. And the good thing I had is I had a pretty good relationship with a lot of the editors on those skiing publications. So pretty much when snowboarding came up in their vision, they would just contact me and say, well, look, what do you think? What are we going to do? What stories, photos, guys? So it was good because I had pretty much a free run with them, and they never edited anything, they never questioned anything, and just furnished the material. And no, they were thrilled. And I thought that sort of helped consolidate the sport, because a snowboard magazine is one thing, but a ski magazine at the time was something else, because a lot more eyes are casting across it. So for me, it was super important to try and get our message out there without making it seem too corny and adapted to the ski brain. It was always a funny line to tread, because they always wanted to sort of hitch it up a little bit, and we were desperately trying to not do that and keep it very core and roots, and just try to be brutal and show exactly what it was and who the guys were that were doing it. So they were often pretty interesting days with all those magazines.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you one thing, Cal. From all your time in snowboarding, which has been considerable, what have you learned from it? And what advice would you perhaps give to other young guys that might be following on that may get to see this podcast one day?
Well, I don't know. I've learned a lot of different things from a lot of different people in snowboarding. Probably one of the hardest things at the time was learning to just be yourself, and be free, because early on in snowboarding, everyone hated you. If you had dreadlocks like I did, you couldn't get a job. It was difficult. People hated you, So one thing I teach my kids is you can do anything, it doesn't matter what it is. You've just got to find a way basically to do it. If you've got 10 people saying no, it doesn't matter. You find a way, and if you want it, you do it.
Usually when you get those people saying no, I've always been fairly obstinate like that, and I find it's a good sign, because we must be onto something if they're concerned and don't want you to do it or don't want to proceed down that path. So I think that's good advice, sort of follow your passion, follow your heart, and in the end, that's all you've got, isn't it?
That's all you got, and that's it.
So what would you rate as your best and your worst moment in snowboarding when you think back?
Probably my worst times, I reckon, was when I got burnt out and I lost that love that I had. It wasn't just snowboarding; it was the entire snow scene. I'd had enough. I needed to do something else. I needed a break. But I reckon the best times, mate, I've had many, and it could have been that Australian Championships where Craig Kelly was out here, and I remember we were all sitting there and it was puking snow. I remember me, Volandis, Dave Kelly, we all just went and we blew the comp off and just went and snake powder runs, and that's what it was about. You'd sit there. We'd only sit there for so long, and I had a great trip, heli skiing in Canada half a dozen years ago with Bart and his crew. That was a great time as well. All the friends I made in Colorado, we used to just basically run amok over there. It was pretty hectic what we got up to. But if my life was as free and easy now as it was then, it would be pretty good.
So you're saying you did a trip with Bart and the guys? What, you do a heli board trip, did you?
Yeah. Yep. So Bart had a hookup that he does every year, and he invited me over. So went over for a week in Canada. Met those guys for a week and did his heli deal. So that was good. It was
Where
good
did you
fun.
go to? Where did you go to in Canada?
It's Galena in Canada. So basically, you fly in, you hop on a bus, and you drive on a bus to the middle of absolute nowhere. And you basically, bus drops you off, you get all your baggage out, and you're sitting in this snow field. And then all of a sudden, a couple of choppers come roaring out of the distance, and they come down and pick you up and take you back to this amazing lodge, and that's it. You're there, and all you got to do is ride as hard and as fast as you can imagine in deep snow. So yeah, it's really good.
Let the surrealism begin.
Yeah, yeah. And for me, that trip, it's full on. You got no time to stop. It's all new. You got a lot of adrenaline pumping. And I came back from that knowing exactly what my next step is going to be in life. So that's such a good thing. When you get a bit caught up, you don't know where you're going. Life gets a bit boring. If you can do something like that again, you come back very clear.
Yeah, all those moments of clarification you need, don't they? Because they reset the meter and reset the perspective, and you can look at things new again or with a fresh eyes.
Absolutely. And I think for me, I still need to do something extreme. I need to basically push it to the limit and get scared and not know whether your actions. You've got to hold it together so you come home, so you don't die out there. And it's good.
What are you doing with yourself these days? You were talking about boards in the early days, but I presume you've got a different life these days.
Yeah, so got a wife, two great kids. Life's great. We've been working hard. Snowboard heaps, mountain bike ride heaps. We're racing motor cars as well, and just trying to still live life on the edge.
In other words, you haven't grown up yet.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. But I'm 50 this year, so yeah, I'm just trying to find something else to race that I've never done before. I failed because they didn't like my art, which I don't know how you can not like somebody's art because it's supposed to be up to their interpretation. I haven't really got many secrets, I don't think. We're pretty straight up.
Yeah, some 30 years later, we can sit down and talk together, and we haven't seen each other for 30 years. And it's just like we sort of hooked up a bit not long ago. So I think that's the beauty of it. I don't have too many sports in my life that I participated in where I'm still talking with guys that we hung out with so long ago, and we've all got such great stories to tell. And I think that's one of the beauties of snowboarding. There was something that brought a lot of very different individuals together, and the glue's still there, even if we don't ride as much or don't go as much or whatever. But the glue of what it meant is still very deeply ingrained in us, I think.
Yeah, and it's great to hear those days. The Buller Pipe, the Kemper days. That's just how I remember it too. So yeah, it's cool to talk to someone that was there and remembers those days.
Oh, I think you guys were fantastic. For me, it was funny when I went to Buller that year because I didn't really know what to expect. I had memories of the events, I think the Peugeot series and the Guthica series, but when everybody showed up in force that day at Buller, and I looked at everyone from Dave Pavlik to Steve Toohey to Shane from Canada and Ross Miller on Team Buller with Steve Brown, and then there was all you guys which were driving this thing probably as hard as I could imagine it be driven. I just thought, damn, this is going to be a colourful event. I'm going to love this. This is going to be brilliant. And that was literally the very first time I met all you guys. I had never met you before, or Tim or Dave or Sean or Willie in these things. And I just thought it was just absolutely brilliant. It was exactly what Australian snow sports needed, was not just snowboarding, but you guys.
Yeah. It was good times. Oh, because I was young there, so all those guys used to sneak us into all the bars in Vic that you guys had, and they, Pav, Tui, and all that crew pretty much looked after us as big brothers back then.
Well, we're outlaws in a brotherhood, so we're always happy to break the rules together, aren't we?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yep.
All right, Cal, I'm going to boot this baby home. I've got a question I ask everybody, and it's because I'd like to know who the inner Cal Goodman is. Imagine if you were some sort of modern day superhero and you could change anything in the world today. Who or what would be on your hit list?
Superhero, I don't know. I'd probably turn big and green like the Hulk. But I don't know, mate. This last year's been hectic for everyone in the world, and we're very lucky. And I would change a lot of things for a lot of other people than me. Like, we're doing great, and there's a lot of people that aren't. So that's what I'd do. I'd change a lot of things that everyone else needed before I'd change what I needed. So
Redistribute the wealth a bit better.
Yeah, not just wealth, I guess the wealth without the wealth, not physical money, but the wealth of happiness, and that's what the world needs more than money.
Well-being.
Yeah, well-being and happiness at the moment after this hectic year,
Yeah, and a lot of positivity about things, and keeping the kids positive. I've got 3 kids myself who are a bit older than your ones, but in very much the same vein. And I look back on the years we had when we were at that age, and I'm still desperately trying to keep all that alive for them, despite the changes that have happened. But keep that thing strong, keep that flame burning. Don't let it die out. Keep it flickering, and you'll get your chance again to make your
absolutely.
mark. So make your mark. So. All right, Cal, well, I think we're going to wrap it up about there. It's for me, it's been quite an experience to see you again. I'm absolutely stoked to see you're alive and well on the right side of the horizon, and still ripping along like I remembered you to be. And I'd like to thank you for coming on board this edition of the Downhill Slide.
Yep, no problems. Thanks for having me.
Well, that's a wrap for this edition. Hope you enjoyed it. And remember to subscribe and comment below. I'm Peter Robbo, and we'll do this again soon with another take on the Downhill Slide.